The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency room buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting a sickly pallor over my already bruised skin. I winced as I shifted on the hard plastic chair, the taste of copper still lingering in my mouth. 3 cracked ribs, a split lip, and a face that resembled an abstract painting. This wasn't how I'd planned to spend my Thursday night. "Miss Sullivan?" The nurse called my name for the second time, her voice tinged with the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift. "Here," I managed, my voice little more than a rasp as I raised my hand. Pain shot through my side with the simple movement. I'd been waiting for over 2 hours, one of many casualties of a city that never seemed to sleep, or stop hurting people. The night shift at Joe's Diner had ended at midnight, and I'd been taking my usual shortcut through West Side Park when they jumped me. 3 men, faces obscured by hoodies, fists like hammers. They hadn't even bothered to steal my purse. The nurse guided me to a curtained cubicle, her eyes barely registering my injuries. In a place like St. Mary's, I was just another broken body in an endless procession. "Doctor will be with you shortly," she murmured, already turning away. I closed my eyes, leaning my head against the wall, 26 years old, and this was what my life had become. Working double shifts to make rent on a studio apartment that leaked when it rained, taking night classes I could barely stay awake for, and now this, a beating from strangers for reasons I couldn't fathom. The curtain rustled, and I opened my eyes, expecting to see an overworked resident. Instead, I found myself staring at polished Italian leather shoes, leading up to a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. My gaze traveled upward reluctantly. The man standing before me wasn't a doctor. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his expensive jacket. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the harsh hospital lighting. His black hair was neatly combed back, revealing a thin scar that ran along his right temple. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a mountain of a man, bald and expressionless, hands clasped in front of him in a way that made his suit jacket pull back enough to reveal the holster beneath. The air in the small cubicle suddenly felt thin, charged with something dangerous. I pressed myself further against the wall, ignoring the protest of my ribs. "Eliza Sullivan?" The well-dressed man's voice was deep, with the faintest hint of an accent I couldn't place. I nodded, too surprised and frightened to question how he knew my name. His dark eyes moved methodically over my injuries, cataloging each bruise and cut with detached precision. When he finally met my gaze again, there was something cold and calculating in his expression that made my stomach knot. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, wincing as the movement sent pain lancing through my temple. "My name is Adriano Russo." The name hung in the air between us. Even I, who paid little attention to the whispers of the city's underworld, knew that name. The Russo family owned half of the city, the half that didn't appear in tourism brochures. Restaurants, nightclubs, casinos, and other darker enterprises that were only spoken about in hushed tones. My voice faltered. "I don't understand why you're here." Adriano Russo moved closer, his cologne, something expensive and subtle, cutting through the antiseptic hospital smell. He reached into his jacket pocket, and I flinched instinctively, but he only pulled out a phone, tapping on the screen before turning it toward me. On the screen was a blurry image from what appeared to be security footage. I recognized myself, walking through West Side Park, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A fourth figure, watching from the shadows, directing the 3 men who attacked me. "The man orchestrating your assault," Russo said, his voice dangerously soft, "is my brother's associate." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes never leaving mine. "Which brings me to why I'm here, Miss Sullivan. Matteo, my brother, disappeared early this morning. His last known location was near where you were attacked." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I shook my head, ignoring the stabbing pain. "I don't know anything about your brother. I was just walking home from work." Adriano studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the man behind him and nodded once. The large man left, closing the curtain behind him. When we were alone, Adriano pulled up a chair and sat directly in front of me, close enough that our knees almost touched. There was nowhere to retreat. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My brother and I, we have our differences, but he is family, and in my family nothing is more important than blood." He leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into mine. "So, I'm going to ask you once, and I expect the truth. You have 5 seconds. Who beat you?" Fear crawled up my spine, sharp and cold. "I told you, I don't know. They were wearing masks. I didn't recognize any of them." His jaw tightened, the only visible sign of his growing impatience. "The man who ordered it, the one watching. Did he speak to you?" "No." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "They just attacked me. They didn't say anything." For a long, terrible moment, he simply stared at me, as if he could extract the truth through sheer force of will. Then unexpectedly he reached out and took my hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he turned my palm over, examining the defensive wounds on my knuckles. "You fought back," he observed, something like approval flickering in his eyes. "I grew up with 3 brothers," I said, then immediately regretted offering even that small piece of personal information. His thumb traced a light circle on my palm before he released my hand. The contact left my skin tingling, though whether from fear or something else I couldn't say. "Here's what's going to happen, Eliza Sullivan," Adriano said, standing up. "You're coming with me." Panic surged through me. "What? No. I need to be seen by a doctor. You'll receive better medical care at my residence than you would here." It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact. And more importantly, you'll be safe. Safe from what? From whoever wanted to send me a message by hurting you and taking my brother. His voice hardened. Because make no mistake, this was no random attack. You were chosen, deliberately. But why me? I'm nobody. I wait tables and take night classes. I don't know any... I stopped abruptly as a memory surfaced. A customer at the diner 3 nights ago. Well-dressed, good-looking, generous tipper. He'd flirted with me, and I'd flirted back. He'd asked for my number, and I'd given it to him. "Matteo," I whispered. Adriano's expression sharpened. "You know my brother." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "He came into the diner where I work. We talked. He asked for my number." I swallowed. I didn't know who he was. Something dangerous flashed in Adriano's eyes. "And did you see him again after that?" "No. He texted me once, asking if I wanted to get dinner, but I was working a double shift and told him I couldn't." Adriano was silent for a long moment, his mind clearly working through this new information. Finally, he pulled out his phone again and made a call. "Bring the car to the emergency entrance and find out everything about Joe's diner." He ended the call without waiting for a response and turned back to me. "We're leaving now. I can't just... You can, and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "Whatever is happening, you're now involved. And in my experience, Miss Sullivan, it's better to be under my protection than to be left exposed to my enemies." I wanted to protest, to scream for help, but a bone-deep exhaustion was settling over me, intensified by the pain of my injuries. And beneath the fear, a treacherous voice whispered that maybe he was right, maybe I wasn't safe. The curtain opened, and the large man returned, accompanied by a woman in a crisp pantsuit who carried a folded wheelchair. "Doctor says you have 3 fractured ribs, facial contusions, and possibly a mild concussion," Adriano informed me, taking a folded document from the woman. "I've arranged for your release into private medical care." I stared at him, bewildered. "How did you—" "Money opens many doors, especially in underfunded hospitals." He gestured to the wheelchair. "Can you manage? Or shall I carry you?" The thought of being carried by this dangerous man was enough to propel me into motion. I stood shakily, ignoring the pain that radiated through my body, and lowered myself into the wheelchair. As the woman pushed me through the emergency room, I caught the eye of the nurse who had called my name earlier. She quickly looked away, pretending not to see me leaving with these people who were clearly not hospital staff. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. A black SUV with tinted windows idled at the curb, flanked by 2 identical vehicles. The driver stepped out immediately, opening the rear door. Adriano helped me from the wheelchair into the car, his hands strong and sure. As I settled into the leather seat, I caught a glimpse of a holstered gun beneath his jacket. He slid in beside me, his body radiating heat in the air-conditioned interior. "Take us home," he directed the driver. As the car pulled away from the hospital, reality crashed over me. I was leaving with a man who was, by all accounts, one of the most dangerous people in the city. A man whose brother had disappeared after apparently showing interest in me. "Why am I really here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "What do you want from me?" Adriano turned to look at me, his face half-shadowed in the darkened car. "My brother saw something in you, Eliza Sullivan, and then he vanished, while you were left beaten but alive. I want to know why." He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair from my face. "And until I have those answers, you belong to me." The car accelerated onto the highway, carrying me away from everything familiar and into the orbit of Adriano Russo. A man who collected debts, commanded loyalty, and if the rumors were true, never hesitated to eliminate threats. And somehow, impossibly, I had become something of value to him. The Russo estate materialized from the darkness like something from another world, a sprawling mansion set back from a winding private road, its stone facade illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. Iron gates parted silently as our convoy approached, security cameras tracking our movement with mechanical precision. I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass, watching as we passed a small gatehouse where armed men stood at attention. My mind struggled to process how dramatically my life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning, I'd been worried about making rent. Now, I was entering the compound of a man whose name was whispered with fear. "We have a doctor waiting," Adriano said, breaking the silence that had settled between us during the drive. "He'll examine you properly." The SUV rolled to a stop beneath a covered portico. Before the driver could exit, Adriano was already opening his door and circling to my side. When he offered his hand, I hesitated. "You have two choices," he said, reading my reluctance. "Walk in with dignity, or I carry you. Either way, you're going inside." I took his hand. The entrance hall of the mansion was a study in understated opulence. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, and artwork that even my untrained eye recognized as valuable. A middle-aged man in a crisp white coat stood waiting, a leather medical bag in hand. "This is Dr. Reeves," Adriano introduced. "He has been our family physician for 20 years. The doctor's kind eyes betrayed nothing of what he thought about being summoned to treat a battered woman in the middle of the night. "Let's get you comfortable, Miss Sullivan," he said, gesturing toward a hallway. "I'd like to examine those ribs properly." I glanced at Adriano, who nodded once. "I have calls to make. Anton will show you to a guest suite afterward." He indicated the large man who had been at the hospital, now standing unobtrusively in the corner. "Rest. We'll talk in the morning." The examination took place in what appeared to be a fully equipped medical room. Dr. Reeves was thorough but gentle, confirming the 3 cracked ribs, treating my cuts, and checking for signs of concussion. "You're lucky," he said, as he wrapped my ribs with practiced efficiency. "No internal bleeding, and the facial lacerations won't scar if you follow the treatment regimen." He handed me 2 pills and a glass of water. "For the pain." I accepted them gratefully, beyond the point of suspicion. "How long have you worked for the Russos?" I asked as he packed away his equipment. Dr. Reeves paused, considering his words. "I delivered both Adriano and Matteo," he said finally. "I've watched them grow into the men they are today." Something in his tone suggested that statement was more complex than it seemed. After the doctor left, Anton led me through the house to a suite that was larger than my entire apartment. The bedroom featured a king-sized 4-poster bed, a sitting area with plush armchairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that would presumably offer a view of the grounds in daylight. "The bathroom is through there," Anton said, his first words to me since we'd met. His voice was unexpectedly soft for such a large man. "Clean clothes are in the dresser. Mr. Russo had them brought in while you were with the doctor." The question of how Adriano knew my size sent a chill through me, but I was too exhausted to dwell on it. "Thank you," I said, already moving toward the bathroom. Miss Sullivan. Anton paused at the door. The suite is not locked, but there are security personnel throughout the grounds. For your protection. The message was clear. Don't try to leave. The bathroom was a marvel of marble and glass, with a shower large enough for 4 people and a soaking tub that looked deep enough to swim in. I caught sight of my reflection in the massive mirror and barely recognized myself. My normally vibrant auburn hair hung in limp strands, and a dark bruise bloomed across my left cheekbone. My bottom lip was split and swollen. In that moment, standing in a bathroom that probably cost more than a decade of my rent, wearing clothes stiff with dried blood, I felt the full weight of my situation crash over me. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help me now. I stripped off my ruined clothes and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water sluice over my battered body. As I washed away the physical evidence of the night's trauma, my mind worked through the fragments of information I had. Matteo Russo had flirted with me at the diner. Then he disappeared. I was attacked. And now his brother, a man who clearly commanded enormous power and resources, had essentially kidnapped me, convinced I was somehow connected to Matteo's disappearance. The clothes in the dresser fit perfectly. Silk pajamas, casual wear, even underwear in my exact size. I chose the pajamas and climbed into the enormous bed, expecting sleep to elude me. Instead, whether from the pain medication or sheer exhaustion, I fell into darkness almost immediately. I dreamed of dark eyes watching me, of hands reaching from shadows, of running down endless corridors where every door led back to the same room. Morning light filtered through gauzy curtains when I woke. For a disorienting moment, I didn't recognize my surroundings. Then memory flooded back, along with the dull ache of my injuries. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of a young woman carrying a tray. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan," she said, setting the tray on a nearby table. "Mr. Russo asked me to bring you breakfast and inform you that he would like to see you in his study at 10 o'clock. She gestured to a garment bag hanging on the closet door. "He also suggested you might be more comfortable in fresh attire." I glanced at a delicate watch on the bedside table. It was just after 9. "Thank you," I managed, my voice still rough with sleep. After she left, I inspected the breakfast tray. Fresh fruit, yogurt, pastries, and coffee that smelled heavenly. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since my dinner break at the diner the previous evening. The garment bag contained a simple but clearly expensive dress in a deep emerald that complemented my auburn hair, along with comfortable flats. Everything fit as if tailored specifically for me, which was entirely possible, I realized. The level of resources at Adriano's disposal was becoming increasingly clear, and increasingly unnerving. At precisely 10 o'clock, Anton appeared to escort me to Adriano's study. We walked through corridors lined with artwork and antiquities that spoke of old money and refined taste, an odd juxtaposition to the criminal empire I knew the Russo family controlled. Adriano's study was a masculine space of dark wood, leather, and books. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens, and a large desk dominated one end of the room. Adriano stood looking out the windows, hands clasped behind his back. He turned as we entered, his eyes sweeping over me in a quick assessment. "Leave us," he said to Anton, who nodded and withdrew, closing the heavy door behind him. "Did you sleep well?" Adriano asked, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs positioned before his desk. I perched on the edge of the chair, keeping my back straight despite the pain in my ribs. As well as could be expected, he moved to lean against the front of his desk, close enough that I had to tilt my head to maintain eye contact. He had changed from the previous night's suit into dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. The casual attire did nothing to diminish his aura of authority. "I've had my people investigating since last night," he said without preamble. "The men who attacked you work for Victor Kane." The name meant nothing to me, and my blank expression must have conveyed as much. "Kane is a business associate of my brother's," Adriano continued. Or was. Their relationship had become strained recently. I still don't understand what this has to do with me. Adriano reached behind him and picked up a folder from his desk, opening it to reveal photographs. He handed them to me one by one. The first showed me at the diner, serving a table. The second captured me leaving my apartment building. The third, my stomach clenched, showed me talking with Matteo at the diner, his hand resting lightly on mine as he leaned across the counter. "These were found in Matteo's apartment," Adriano said, his voice deceptively calm, "along with detailed notes about your schedule, your address, even the classes you're taking." I stared at the photos, ice forming in my veins. He was stalking me? Matteo has always been intense in his interests. A muscle ticked in Adriano's jaw. But this goes beyond his usual behavior. "I only met him once," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We talked for maybe 20 minutes. He seemed nice, normal. My brother excels at seeming normal when it suits him." Adriano took the photos back, returning them to the folder. "The question is, why you? What made you special enough for him to take such an interest? And more importantly, what made you valuable enough for Kane to use you to get to him?" "I don't know," I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. "I'm not special. I'm just trying to get through school while working enough hours to keep a roof over my head. I don't know anything about your world, your business, your brother." "And yet," Adriano cut in, "my brother disappeared within hours of Kane's men attacking you. That's not coincidence." He moved away from the desk, crossing to a sideboard where he poured himself a measure of amber liquid, despite the early hour. He didn't offer me any. "Tell me about your conversation with Matteo. Everything you can remember." I closed my eyes, trying to recall the details of an interaction I'd thought unremarkable at the time. He came in around 9. The diner was quiet. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee and apple pie. I opened my eyes to find Adriano watching me intently. We talked about normal things. He asked about school. I told him I was studying nursing. He mentioned he had some business in the area and was staying nearby for a few weeks. "Did he mention Kane? Any business dealings? Any concerns?" I shook my head. "No, it was just flirting. Nothing serious." Adriano's expression darkened, and when he texted you later, he asked if I wanted to have dinner the following night. I told him I was working a double shift and couldn't make it. He said he understood and would try again. I frowned, remembering, but he didn't. Adriano set down his glass with careful precision. "May I see your phone?" It wasn't really a question. I realized I hadn't seen my phone since the hospital. "I don't have it with me. We recovered it from your purse." He crossed to the desk and opened a drawer, retrieving my battered phone. "Password?" I hesitated, then gave it to him. He entered it and scrolled through, presumably looking at my exchange with Matteo. His expression gave nothing away. "Eliza," he said finally, using my first name for the first time that morning. "I need you to understand your position. You are the last person known to have had contact with my brother. You are being watched by people who wish him harm. Whether you know it or not, you are holding information that could lead me to Matteo." He returned my phone to the drawer rather than to me. "Until I find him, you will remain here, under my protection and my supervision. Your safety depends on my goodwill." There was no explicit threat in his words, but I felt it nonetheless. "And if your brother isn't found," something dangerous flashed in his eyes, "that outcome is unacceptable." A knock at the door interrupted us. Anton entered without waiting for permission, his usual impassive expression replaced by barely concealed urgency. "Sir, we found something. At the diner." Adriano straightened. "Show me." Anton handed him a tablet. Adriano swiped through whatever was displayed on the screen, his expression growing darker with each image. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes cold. "It seems your diner was the site of considerable violence last night. After you left for your shift's end, but before the morning staff arrived." My heart pounded. What kind of violence? Adriano turned the tablet toward me. The screen showed the interior of Joe's diner, now a scene of destruction. Overturned tables, broken glass, and smears of what could only be blood on the checkered tile floor. "This wasn't a robbery," Adriano said, taking back the tablet. "This was a message. For me." "What about the other staff? Was anyone hurt?" I thought of Linda, the night manager who always stayed to close up after I left. The night manager was found unconscious in the storage room. She's in the hospital but expected to recover. Anton's voice was clinical, detached. No one else was on the premises. Relief washed through me. followed quickly by renewed fear. If Adriano was right, and this was connected to me somehow, then the violence was spreading to touch the lives of innocent people I knew. "I need to call my supervisor," I said. "I need to let them know I won't be in for my shift tonight." Adriano shook his head. "That's been handled. As far as your employer knows, you were attacked on your way home and are recuperating with family." The casual way he'd inserted himself into my life, rearranging it to suit his needs, sent a surge of anger through me. "You can't just—" "I can, and I have." He handed the tablet back to Anton. "Prepare the car. We're going to pay Victor Kane a visit." Anton nodded and left. Adriano turned back to me. "You'll be coming with us." "Why?" I demanded, rising to my feet despite the protest of my ribs. "Why drag me deeper into this mess?" Adriano moved toward me, closing the distance until he stood directly before me. Up close, I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, a small scar near his right eyebrow that I hadn't noticed before. "Because you, Eliza Sullivan, are the key to understanding what happened to my brother." His voice was soft, but unyielding. "And if Victor Kane is involved, seeing you might provoke a reaction that tells me what I need to know." You're using me as bait," I whispered. His hand came up to lightly trace the bruise on my cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I'm using every tool at my disposal to find my brother, and right now, that includes you. I should have been terrified. I should have been plotting my escape. Instead, I found myself captivated by the intensity of his gaze, the absolute certainty with which he moved through the world. There was something magnetic about Adriano Russo, something that pulled at me despite every rational thought screaming for caution. "Get ready," he said, dropping his hand. "We leave in 20 minutes. As I walked back to my room, escorted by a silent security guard, I tried to make sense of my conflicted feelings. I was a prisoner here, however gilded the cage, and yet, the alternative, being alone and unprotected while somehow entangled in a dangerous game I didn't understand, seemed worse. For now, at least, my best chance of survival lay with the man who had claimed ownership of me, the man whose dark eyes seemed to see through every defense I possessed, the man who might be my captor, my protector, or something far more dangerous. The car journey to Victor Kane's territory took us deep into the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses stood as rusted monuments to the city's manufacturing past. I sat beside Adriano in the back of the SUV, trying to ignore how his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, filled the confined space. Anton drove, with another security detail following in a second vehicle. "Victor Kane controls most of the shipping that comes through this district," Adriano explained, breaking the tense silence. "He and Matteo had been working on expanding our joint interests in the Port Authority." "And that arrangement went wrong somehow?" I asked, watching the deteriorating landscape roll by. Adriano's eyes narrowed slightly. "My brother became convinced that Victor was skimming from our shipments, substantial amounts. So this is about money," I said, not entirely surprised. "In our world, Miss Sullivan, it's rarely just about money." His voice held a note of something almost like bitterness. "Money is simply the most convenient way to keep score. What matters is respect, loyalty, power." The SUV turned into a narrow street flanked by high concrete walls topped with razor wire. Ahead stood a nondescript building with reinforced steel doors and small, opaque windows, the kind of place designed to keep people out, or in. 2 armed guards stepped forward as we approached, but recognition dawned on their faces when they saw who occupied the vehicle. They spoke into their radios, and the heavy doors began to slide open. "Remember," Adriano said as we pulled into a small courtyard, "stay close to me. Say nothing unless I indicate you should speak, and observe everything." The interior of the building belied its grim exterior. The entryway opened into a lavishly decorated office space, with Italian marble floors and contemporary art adorning the walls. Men in expensive suits moved with purpose, most wearing the subtle bulge of shoulder holsters beneath their jackets. We were escorted to an elevator by a woman whose fitted blazer didn't quite conceal the gun at her hip. "Mr. Kane is expecting you," she said, swiping a key card to access the penthouse level. Victor Kane was not what I had expected. Where Adriano was all controlled power and intimidating presence, Kane was slight, with silver-threaded dark hair, and the kind of smile that seemed genuinely warm until you noticed it never reached his eyes. He stood as we entered his office, extending his hand to Adriano. "This is an unexpected pleasure," he said, his voice cultured and smooth. "To what do I owe the honor?" Adriano didn't take the offered hand. "You know why I'm here, Victor." Kane's smile remained fixed as he withdrew his hand. His gaze shifted to me, and I felt a chill at the calculating assessment in his eyes. "And who is your lovely companion?" "This is Eliza Sullivan," Adriano said, his tone deceptively casual. "She had an unfortunate encounter with some of your men last night, in Westside Park." Something flickered behind Kane's eyes, surprise perhaps or concern, but it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult me." Adriano's voice remained level, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. "3 of your enforcers attacked her, after which my brother disappeared. After which her workplace was vandalized and her manager assaulted." He stepped closer to Kane. "These are not coincidences." Kane moved to a bar cart, pouring himself a measure of scotch with steady hands. "Drink?" "No." "Miss Sullivan?" Kane offered, turning to me with that empty smile. I shook my head, acutely aware of Adriano's warning to stay silent. Kane shrugged elegantly and took a sip of his scotch. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Adriano. Coming here, making accusations without evidence, bringing this," he waved his glass toward me, "civilian into matters that don't concern her. She was involved the moment your men put their hands on her," Adriano said, his control slipping just enough for me to hear the rage beneath his words. "If some unfortunate soul was attacked in a park known for its criminal activity, that's hardly my concern." Kane set down his glass and pressed a button on his desk. "Now I'm afraid I have pressing business to attend to." Adriano didn't move. "Where is Matteo?" "I haven't seen your brother in days." Kane's smile thinned. "Perhaps he finally decided to break free of your controlling influence." The door opened, and 2 armed guards entered. I tensed, but Adriano seemed unfazed by their presence. "This isn't over, Victor." He turned to leave, his hand coming to rest on the small of my back to guide me out. The heat of his touch seeped through the fabric of my dress. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Miss Sullivan," Kane called after us. "I do hope your injuries heal quickly." There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl, a hidden meaning I couldn't decipher. Adriano's hand pressed more firmly against my back as we entered the elevator, as if he'd sensed my discomfort. Neither of us spoke until we were back in the SUV, pulling away from the compound. Even then, Adriano was silent, his expression dark with thought. "He was lying," I said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. Adriano's gaze snapped to me. "About what?" "Everything, but especially about not knowing me." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warm day. The way he looked at me, he knew exactly who I was. A look of approval crossed Adriano's face. "Good, you noticed." He turned to Anton. "Take us to the port." "What's at the port?" I asked. "Matteo's last scheduled meeting before he disappeared." Adriano's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "Change of plans. Take us back to the house." The shift in his demeanor sent a wave of apprehension through me. "What's happened?" "Someone accessed Matteo's private accounts 30 minutes ago." His voice was tight with controlled emotion. "The location traces back to an abandoned factory on the north side. I need to assemble a team." My heart pounded as the implications sank in. "You think he's being held there, or someone wants me to think that?" Adriano's gaze was calculating, distant. "Either way, I need to be prepared." Back at the mansion, Adriano disappeared into his study with Anton and several other men I hadn't seen before. I was escorted to my room by a silent security guard, effectively sidelined from the rapidly developing situation. I paced the confines of my luxurious prison, mind racing. If Matteo was being held captive, was it because of me somehow? The coincidence of his disappearance so soon after meeting me seemed impossible to ignore. But what possible value could I have to anyone in this world of power, money, and violence? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. A young woman, the same one who had brought breakfast, entered with a tray. "Mr. Russo thought you might be hungry," she said, setting down what appeared to be a late lunch. "Thank you," I said absently, still distracted by my swirling thoughts. "What's your name?" She looked startled by the question. "Sophia, miss." "Sophia, how long have you worked for the Russo family?" She hesitated, clearly uncertain whether she should be engaging in conversation. "5 years, miss." "And Matteo Russo, what's he like?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "It's not my place to discuss the family, miss." "Please," I said, lowering my voice. "I'm caught in the middle of something I don't understand. Anything you could tell me might help." She glanced nervously at the door. "Mr. Matteo is different from his brother. Mr. Adriano is strict, but fair. Mr. Matteo is more," she searched for the word, "unpredictable." A chill ran down my spine. "Unpredictable how?" Sophia shook her head. "I've said too much already." She moved toward the door. "Enjoy your lunch, miss." After she left, I picked at the food without really tasting it. Sophia's reluctance to discuss Matteo only deepened my unease. What had I stumbled into? And more importantly, how could I find my way out? Hours passed with no word from Adriano. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grounds visible from my window. I was considering trying to find someone who could tell me what was happening when the door opened. Adriano stood in the doorway, his expression grim. His suit was impeccable as always, but there was a tiredness around his eyes that hadn't been there earlier. "We found the factory empty," he said without preamble. "It was a diversion." "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to offer. He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "While we were chasing ghosts, someone tried to access the estate's security system." His dark eyes fixed on me. "They were specifically targeting the cameras monitoring your room." My blood ran cold. "Someone's watching me? It would appear so." He crossed to the window, drawing the heavy curtains closed, "which confirms my suspicion that you are central to whatever game is being played." "I don't understand why," I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. "I'm nobody important." Adriano turned to me, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Clearly, you are important to someone. The question is who and why." He moved closer, until he stood directly before me. "I need you to think, Eliza. Before Matteo, was there anyone else unusual in your life? Anyone showing particular interest? Anyone asking questions about you?" I shook my head, then paused as a memory surfaced. "There was, about a month ago, a woman came into the diner. She sat in my section every day for a week, always ordered the same thing, always left a large tip. Then she just stopped coming." "Did she speak to you?" "Just small talk. She said she was new to the area, asked about good places to visit." I frowned, straining to remember details. She had an accent. Eastern European, maybe. Adriano's attention sharpened. "Would you recognize her if you saw her again?" "I think so." He pulled out his phone, swiped through several screens, then showed me an image. "Her?" The photo showed a striking blonde woman with cold eyes and a scar along her jawline. I nodded slowly. "That's her." "Who is she?" "Natalia Petrov. She works for the Sokolov family." His voice had gone flat. "Russian Mafia, with interests that occasionally intersect with ours." "Why would the Russian Mafia be interested in me?" Adriano slipped his phone back into his pocket. "That's what we need to find out." The pieces weren't fitting together. Matteo's interest in me, the Russian woman, the attack, the diner, it all seemed connected, yet the pattern remained elusive. "There's more to this than a business dispute between your brother and Kane, isn't there?" I asked. Adriano studied me for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "And I'm beginning to think Matteo knew exactly what he was doing when he approached you." Adriano didn't elaborate further that night. Instead, he informed me that additional security measures were being implemented around the estate, particularly focused on my suite. What had been implicit captivity was now explicit protection. Though the distinction felt academic, either way, I wasn't leaving. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed in the luxurious bed, haunted by faces I barely knew. Matteo Russo, Victor Kane, the Russian woman. Somehow, impossibly, I had become a nexus point in a dangerous game played by people with the resources and ruthlessness to destroy lives on a whim. Dawn was breaking when a sharp knock jolted me from my fitful dozing. Adriano entered without waiting for a response, already dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. His face was taut with tension. "We need to move," he said, his tone leaving no room for questions. "Now." I scrambled out of bed, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable I appeared in the silk pajamas. "What's happened?" "One of my men was found dead 3 blocks from here." He crossed to the dresser, pulling out clothes and tossing them onto the bed. "The message left with him suggests they know you're here." My fingers went numb with fear. "Someone died because of me?" Adriano paused, his expression softening fractionally. "No, Eliza. Someone died because I underestimated our opposition." He gestured to the clothes. 5 minutes. I dressed in a daze. Jeans, a sweater, comfortable shoes. Practical clothes for what? I couldn't imagine. When I emerged from the bathroom, Adriano was on the phone, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Italian. He ended the call abruptly when he saw me. "Ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. We moved through the mansion with brisk efficiency, flanked by Anton and another security guard whose name I didn't know. The household staff were conspicuously absent. "Where are we going?" I asked as we entered the garage, a cavernous space housing at least a dozen luxury vehicles. Somewhere unexpected. Adriano led me not to the SUVs we'd used previously, but to an unassuming sedan with tinted windows. The kind of place no one would look for a Russo. The implications of that statement sank in as Anton took the wheel, and we pulled out of the garage through a service entrance I hadn't known existed. Adriano Russo, who commanded an empire from his fortified estate, was going into hiding, because of me. We drove in tense silence for nearly an hour, taking a circuitous route that seemed designed to identify any tail. Eventually, we entered an older residential neighborhood of modest homes and tree-lined streets, as far from the luxury of the Russo estate as imaginable. The house Anton pulled up to was a small bungalow with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs. It looked abandoned, or at least neglected. "My mother's childhood home," Adriano said, answering my unspoken question. "It remains in our family, but its existence is not widely known." The interior of the house belied its shabby exterior. Though small and simply furnished, it was clean and well-maintained, with modern appliances in the kitchen and fresh linens on the beds. "We'll be safe here for now," Adriano said, as Anton checked each room methodically. "The house isn't connected to any Russo holdings. The deed is held in a shell corporation that would take considerable resources to trace back to us." I sank onto a worn sofa, the reality of our situation crashing over me. People are dying, and we're in hiding. All because of me, and I still don't understand why. Adriano remained standing, his posture rigid with restrained tension. I received information overnight that may explain part of the puzzle. His dark eyes fixed on me with unsettling intensity. "What do you know about your parents?" The question was so unexpected that for a moment I could only stare at him. My parents? They died in a car accident when I was 12. I was raised by my aunt, and before that? "What do you know about them?" I shook my head, confused by this line of questioning. "Normal people. My mom was a teacher. My dad worked in finance, some kind of analyst. We lived in the suburbs. It was ordinary." "What was your father's name?" "Michael Sullivan." I was growing increasingly uneasy. "What does this have to do with anything?" Adriano pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph, an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Financial analyst missing, foul play suspected." I took the phone, my hands shaking slightly as I read the brief article about Michael Sullivan, 34, who had failed to return home from work. The article mentioned he had recently been promoted at Preston Financial Group and was working on a sensitive internal audit. "This is from 20 years ago, I said, looking up at Adriano. "My father died 14 years ago, with my mother." "Did you ever see their bodies?" Adriano asked, his voice gentle but insistent. The question hit me like a physical blow. "No," I whispered. "The accident. They were both. It was a closed casket funeral." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What are you saying?" Preston Financial Group was a shell company used by several organizations, including the Sokolov family, to launder money, Adriano said, taking back the phone. "Your father disappeared while conducting an audit that would have exposed their operation." The room seemed to tilt around me. "No, that's not possible." My parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Your mother died in that accident, Adriano said quietly, along with a man who was identified as Michael Sullivan based on the ID found on his body. But facial recognition software comparing that man's autopsy photos with earlier images of your father shows a discrepancy. The man who died with your mother was not Michael Sullivan. I stood up, needing to move, to escape the implications of his words. This is insane. You're saying my father faked his death? That he abandoned us? I'm saying your father may have been forced to disappear, and that 14 years later, his daughter was approached by Matteo Russo, who then disappeared himself. Shortly after which, the Sokolov family took an interest in you. The connections were forming in my mind, each one more terrible than the last. They think I know something, I whispered. They think I know where he is, Adriano nodded. And they think Matteo discovered his location through you. But I don't know anything about my father beyond what I told you, I was shouting now, panic rising in my throat. If he's alive, if he's been alive all this time, I have no idea where he is. I believe you, Adriano said, catching my wrists as I gestured wildly. But they don't. His touch was firm but not painful, grounding me as my world spun out of control. What do they want from me? I asked, my voice breaking. Information you don't have. His thumbs traced small circles on the insides of my wrists, an oddly intimate gesture. Or perhaps they want to use you as bait, as I initially suspected. If your father is alive, and if he learns his daughter is in danger, he might reveal himself, I finished, the scenario playing out with horrifying clarity. But why now? After 14 years? Adriano released my wrists and stepped back, his expression thoughtful. That's the question. What changed? Why would Matteo suddenly take an interest in you? And why would the Sokolov family move now? The answer came to me with startling clarity. My inheritance. I turned 26 last month. According to my parents' will, that's when I gain access to their estate, insurance money, investments, property. The attorney handling it contacted me a few weeks ago to begin the paperwork. Adriano's eyes sharpened with interest. What attorney? James Preston. He was a friend of my father's, apparently. He's been managing the trust since they died. Preston? Adriano repeated. Like Preston Financial Group? A chill ran through me. I never made that connection. Adriano was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. I sank back onto the sofa, my mind reeling with implications. If Preston was connected to the people my father had allegedly been investigating, we need to move again, Adriano said after ending the call. Preston's law firm has connections to the Sokolov family. If he's been handling your inheritance, he knows exactly where to find you. That's how they found me at the diner, I realized. That's how they knew where I lived, where I worked. Adriano nodded grimly, and if Preston is involved, it's possible Matteo was working with him, or against him. Either way, the connection points back to you and your father. Where will we go? I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted despite the surge of adrenaline. Somewhere even more unexpected. Adriano's hand came to rest on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly warm through the fabric of my sweater. I won't let them use you, Eliza. I promise you that. The conviction in his voice stirred something in me. Not just gratitude, but a deeper, more complicated emotion I wasn't ready to examine. In the span of 2 days, this dangerous man had become my protector, my confidant, and perhaps the only person standing between me and those who meant me harm. Why are you doing this? I asked, looking up at him. You could have handed me over to them, negotiated for your brother's release. A shadow passed over his face. Is that what you think of me? I barely know you, I said honestly. But everything I've heard about Adriano Russo suggests you're not a man who hesitates to do whatever is necessary to protect your interests. He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made my heart race. My brother chose you, he said finally. That made you my responsibility. The rest. He paused, something complicated flickering in his expression. The rest is still unfolding. Before I could respond, Anton appeared in the doorway. Car's ready, boss. We need to move. Adriano nodded, his expression shuddering back into the controlled mask I was becoming familiar with. "Stay close to me," he said, extending his hand to help me up. "Whatever happens next, stay close." I took his hand, feeling calluses I wouldn't have expected on a man who commanded an empire from behind a desk. As his fingers closed around mine, I knew with absolute certainty that my life would never be the same again. Our next safe house was a weathered cabin on the shore of a small lake, 2 hours from the city. As the car wound through densely wooded roads, I watched the setting sun fracture through pine branches, casting long shadows across the landscape. We had switched vehicles twice since leaving the bungalow, a precaution that spoke volumes about the danger pursuing us. The cabin itself was rustic, but solid, with a generator for electricity and a well for water. It looked like the kind of place where people came to fish in the summer and hunt in the fall, isolated, unassuming, perfect for disappearing. "We should be safe here for the night," Adriano said, as Anton carried in supplies from the car. "No one knows about this place except my most trusted people." I stood by the stone fireplace, rubbing my arms against the chill. Despite the warmth of the day, the evening air held the crispness of early autumn. And tomorrow we stop running and start hunting. Adriano's voice had taken on a harder edge. "I've had enough of being one step behind." He disappeared into the cabin's small kitchen, returning moments later with 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to me. "Drink. It will help with the cold." I accepted the glass, the amber liquid burning a warm path down my throat. "Do you have a plan?" "The beginning of one." He took a seat in a worn leather armchair, gesturing for me to take the sofa across from him. "Preston is the key. He connects your father, the Sokolovs, and possibly Matteo. Tomorrow we pay him a visit." "You make it sound simple," I said, curling into the corner of the sofa. "Won't he be protected?" A cold smile touched Adriano's lips. "Not well enough." Anton entered from outside, securing the door behind him. "Perimeter is set. I'll take first watch." He nodded to Adriano and disappeared into what I assumed was a back bedroom. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire Anton had lit before going outside. In the dancing light, Adriano's face seemed softer somehow, the sharp angles less severe. "When did you learn the truth?" I asked finally. "About my father, about Preston." Adriano swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the light play through it. "I've had people looking into your background since the night we found you, but the connection to Preston only emerged today, when one of my contacts recognized his name from the Sokolov files." "And Matteo? Where does he fit in all this?" A shadow passed over Adriano's face. "My brother has always had separate interests from the family business. He cultivates his own connections, pursues his own ventures. It's possible he discovered something about Preston, about your father, that made him take an interest in you. Or maybe he just thought I was pretty," I said, attempting a lightness I didn't feel. Adriano's dark gaze fixed on me with unexpected intensity. "That would not be surprising." He set down his glass. "But Matteo rarely acts without multiple motives." I looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "If Preston knows where my father is, why wouldn't he have already used that information? Why wait 14 years? Perhaps he didn't know," Adriano suggested. "Or perhaps the situation changed recently. New players, new priorities. Or perhaps my father is actually dead, and this is all a wild goose chase," I said, the exhaustion of the past days catching up with me. Adriano was silent for a moment. "Do you want him to be dead?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I mourned him 14 years ago. If he's been alive all this time," I trailed off, unable to articulate the complex emotions churning inside me. "And chose not to return to you," Adriano finished softly. I nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "What kind of father does that? One who believes his presence puts his child in danger." Adriano's voice held an unexpected gentleness. "If your father exposed the Sokolov's money laundering operation, he would have been a marked man. Perhaps he thought disappearing was the only way to keep you safe. Fat lot of good that did," I said bitterly, gesturing to our surroundings. Adriano leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Life rarely gives us clean choices, Eliza. We do what we can with the information we have at the time." There was something in his tone, regret, perhaps, or understanding, that made me wonder about his own choices, his own regrets. Before I could pursue that thought, a sharp crack split the night air. Adriano was on his feet in an instant, gun in hand. I hadn't even seen him reach for it. "Get down," he ordered, pushing me to the floor as another shot shattered the cabin's front window. I crawled behind the sofa as Adriano moved to the window, staying low. Anton burst from the back room, rifle in hand. 2 SUVs, he reported tersely. At least 6 men. They've circled the property. Adriano's face was set in hard lines. "How did they find us?" "Questions later," Anton said, moving to the back window. "We need to get her out now." Adriano nodded, returning to where I crouched. "There's a tunnel," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Built during Prohibition. It leads to a boathouse on the lake. Anton will take you through it." "What about you?" I asked, fear making my voice shake. "I'll create a diversion." His hand found mine in the dimness, squeezing once. "Go. Now." I wanted to protest, to demand he come with us, but Anton was already pulling me toward a trapdoor hidden beneath a threadbare rug. As it opened, revealing stone steps descending into darkness, another volley of gunfire peppered the cabin walls. "Go!" Adriano commanded, already moving toward the kitchen, where I glimpsed another door. Anton led me down the steps, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. The tunnel was damp and narrow, forcing us to crouch as we moved. Behind us, I heard the staccato bursts of gunfire intensify, punctuated by the deeper boom of what had to be Anton's abandoned rifle in Adriano's hands. "He'll be fine," Anton said, correctly interpreting my backward glances. "I've never seen anyone survive like the boss." We emerged into a small boathouse after what felt like an eternity. A motorboat bobbed gently at a weathered dock. Anton helped me in, then turned to secure the tunnel entrance behind us. That was when the side door of the boathouse burst open, revealing a tall, blonde woman holding a pistol, Natalia Petrov, the Russian who had watched me at the diner. "Stay where you are," she commanded in heavily accented English. Anton raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a shot rang out. He staggered, his gun slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers as he collapsed to his knees, a red stain blooming on his chest. "No!" I screamed, lunging toward him. "Don't move," Natalia said, her gun now trained on me. "Or you join him." Anton's eyes found mine, a silent apology in them as he slumped to the dock. I froze, terror and grief warring within me. "Now," Natalia said, "you will come with me. Mr. Preston is most eager to speak with you." "Preston?" I repeated, stalling as I frantically searched for some way out of this nightmare. "Why does he want me?" "The location," she said impatiently. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said truthfully. Her eyes narrowed. "The account. Your father's account. Preston knows you've accessed it." "I haven't accessed anything," I insisted. "I don't even know what account you mean." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "The inheritance. The attorney said..." A deafening crack split the air as the boathouse door exploded inward. Natalia whirled, firing blindly toward the entrance. In the chaos, I lunged for Anton's fallen gun, my fingers closing around the cold metal just as Adriano burst through the doorway. 2 shots rang out simultaneously, Natalia's bullet splintering the wood near Adriano's head, and Adriano's finding its mark in her shoulder. She staggered but didn't fall, raising her gun for another shot. Without conscious thought, I raised Anton's weapon and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted through my arms as Natalia crumpled to the ground. Adriano was beside me in an instant, gently taking the gun from my trembling hands. "It's over," he said softly, pulling me against his chest. "It's over." I clutched at his shirt, breathing in his scent, as the reality of what had just happened crashed over me. Anton lay motionless on the dock. Natalia was still, her blood spreading in a dark pool, and I had just shot someone. "She said Preston sent her," I managed through chattering teeth. "Something about my father's account, an inheritance I was supposed to have accessed." Adriano's arms tightened around me. "The pieces are coming together," he said, "but we need to move. There will be others." Anton, I began, looking toward his still form. He's gone, Adriano said, his voice tight with controlled grief. He died protecting you. The best way to honor that is to survive. He helped me to my feet, guiding me toward the boat. As we pushed off from the dock, the night air carried the sounds of distant sirens. Where are we going? I asked, huddling in the boat's bow as Adriano steered us across the dark lake. To find Preston, he said grimly, and end this. The confrontation with Preston unfolded with brutal efficiency. We found him not at his office or home, but at an exclusive club in the city's financial district. Adriano walked in as if he owned the place, his presence parting the crowd like a shark through water. Preston's face when he saw us, saw me, confirmed everything. The shock, the fear, the calculation, all visible in the seconds before Adriano's men surrounded him. In a private room, with the club's music a distant thrum, the truth emerged. My father had indeed discovered the money laundering operation, but instead of exposing it, he had copied the account details and disappeared with the electronic keys to access them. For 14 years, Preston and the Sokolovs had been searching for him, believing he would eventually contact me. The inheritance notification had been bait, designed to flush him out or reveal if I had been in contact with him. And Matteo? Adriano asked, his voice deadly calm as Preston squirmed in his chair. Your brother discovered the connection, Preston admitted. He approached the girl, thinking she might lead him to Michael Sullivan and the accounts. When that yielded nothing, he went to the Sokolovs directly, offering to broker a deal. Where is he now? Adriano demanded. Preston's eyes darted nervously. The Sokolov estate on the North Shore. They're holding him until Sullivan is found. A cold smile curved Adriano's lips. Thank you for your cooperation. What happened next? I choose not to remember in detail. Suffice it to say that by dawn, Matteo Russo was free. The Sokolov estate was in chaos, and I stood in Adriano's study once more, watching as he made call after call, solidifying the new power structure that had emerged overnight. When he finally set down the phone, his eyes found mine across the room. It's done, he said simply. And my father? Still no trace. He crossed to where I stood by the window. But now that the Sokolovs are neutralized, it may be safe for him to return. If he's watching, if he learns what happened, he might reach out to you. I nodded, too emotionally drained to fully process the implications. And us? What happens now? Adriano's hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch gentle despite the violence those same hands had delivered hours before. That, he said softly, is entirely up to you. In his dark eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Uncertainty, vulnerability, hope. This dangerous, powerful man who had protected me, avenged me, and somewhere along the way, begun to care for me, was offering me a choice. I turned my face into his palm, placing a soft kiss against his skin. I think, I said quietly, I'd like to stay, at least until we find some answers. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then stay, he said, drawing me into his arms. Stay as long as you wish.